Hi everybody, how are you? I hope you all are fine and you're having very good time at your home. I'm Amuna Sayed, your science teacher. This is your science book, Science 2, Oxford, and I'm going to present lesson number 1 of week 4. So welcome to the week 4. Here is unit 4, transport in plants, and the topic under discussion are transport system in plants. But before moving into another slide, let me give you a summary or a brief description. Like as with the multicellular animals, we have discussed in our previous lesson, that was the human transport system. So they need a transport system. Similarly, single cell plants need a transport system to carry food, water, and gases to the various cells and organs. However, because the movements made by plants are usually very slow, so they have no need for a heart or similar pumping system. So instead of a continuous circulatory system like that of human body, plants have two set of tubes that is very important in the transport system. These are the learning objectives, levels of transport, and cell transport processes. Here is a warm-up activity. Why a plant needs transport system? Well, plants require a transport system to deliver raw material for photosynthesis to the leaves and to deliver the sugar made to other parts of the plant for use or storage. So that's how plants require transport system to deliver raw material or to deliver important nutrients to other parts of the plants and to get the raw material that is used for the process of photosynthesis. Let's start or discuss the levels of transport system. So the transport basically occurs at three levels. It can include the uptake and loss of water and solutes by individual cells. Okay, so this is the first level. If we talk about the second level, so it includes the short distance transport. The substances are transported at a very short distance from the cell to cell at the level of tissue or organs. And third, the third level is when we talk about the long distance transport of sap within xylem and phloem at the level of the whole plant. So this is the third level and the most advanced one. Now let's discuss the cell transport processes. Cell membrane, as we have already discussed, is basically a selectively permeable membrane. So selectively permeable means they allow only selective substances to move in, and rest of these substances will not go inside the cell membrane. So there are two types of transport, passive transport and active transport. Whereas the passive transport don't use energy. So we don't require energy for the passive transport, which includes simple diffusion, osmosis, facilitated diffusion. Whereas in active transport, we really need ATP energy because the process is carrying out against the concentration gradient. And the processes include under the active transport are chemiosmosis, that is basically a proton pump, and charge gradient, right? So let's discuss passive transport first. So if we talk about the passive transport, it is the most direct forms of membrane transport and they are passive. Passive transport is a naturally occurring phenomena and does not require the cell to exert any of its energy to accomplish the movement. And in passive transport, substances move from an area of higher concentration, look, from the area of higher concentration to an area of low concentration. So this is what you need to understand about the passive transport, right? So the first process that comes under the passive transport is simple diffusion. So simple diffusion is a process in which solutes are moved along the concentration gradient. And as I've already told you, the cell membrane is semi-permeable and diffusion is carried out by the action of hydrogen bonds that is forming between water molecules and the solute molecules. So you can say that simple diffusion is the process by which solutes are basically moved along a concentration gradient in a solution across a semi-permeable membrane. And unlike simple diffusion, cell membranes often incorporate specialized membrane proteins and which help the transport of substances across the membrane. But this includes when we will study or learn about the facilitated diffusion. So this is the basic difference between simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion, that in facilitated diffusion, a specialized membrane protein basically helps to transport substances across the cell membrane. Here is the molecules in simple diffusion are in constant random motion. They are constantly moving. They are not stable. They are not static. They are constantly moving. They are in random motion. Okay, and the molecules in this type of diffusion will move from the area of higher concentration to the area of low concentrations, and eventually a point reached when the concentration is almost equal at both sides, but the molecules will never stop moving. And you know that one of the classic examples of simple diffusion is the movement of gases across the membrane in animals, which we have discussed in earlier topics in the transport of human blood, in which the oxygen and carbon dioxide dissolved in the blood and exchanged by the process of simple diffusion. And if you remember, the exchange of gases was taking place in capillaries. So this is how they are very important. And the difference between the two areas of concentration is called concentration gradient. And concentration gradient is occur when the concentration of particles is higher in one area than another. Okay? And in passive transport, particles will diffuse down a concentration gradient from areas of higher concentration to the areas of lower concentrations until they are evenly spaced. Here we can see this area is a high concentration, and this is our cell membrane that is made up of lipid bilayer. Okay, there is a hydrophobic ends and hydrophilic ends. So the area of higher concentration, and naturally they will start moving towards the area of low concentration. Look at this. Here the process has just started. Now the concentration over here is getting greater, and the point will reach that both areas will get equal concentration and will maintain equilibrium. Equilibrium means the both sides have now equal concentration. So this is how the process is taking place. Now let's talk about osmosis. Osmosis is a term like whenever you um, talk about osmosis, or you are learning about something about osmosis, so it should be understood that we are going to talk about water molecules. So osmosis is basically the diffusion or movement of water through a selectively permeable membrane from high to low concentration. Okay, look at the picture. Here the concentration of water molecules are quite high, and now they start moving from the area of higher concentration to the area of low concentration through a selectively permeable membrane, and in the direction it tends to equalize the solute concentration on the both sides. Understand? Here another example, you can see there are sugar molecules. These, the black one, are water molecules. Okay, and there is a semi-permeable membrane. So they will what happens that after some time they will start moving towards the area where they are less in concentration. And the semi-permeable membrane will allow the movement of water molecule across the membrane. So as we have just discussed, that osmosis is basically the transport or movement of water molecules. So the black one are water molecules. Okay, the black dot represents water molecules. So the semi-permeable membrane here will allow the movement of water molecules only. So this is the concept behind osmosis, that it is the movement of water molecules from an area of higher concentration to the area of low concentration. Now let's talk about the facilitated diffusion, which is a very important type of passive diffusion and passive movement of substances such as the biological molecules or ions across the membrane. And what happens that in this type of diffusion, we need some sort of transport proteins that located in the plasma membrane. So with the help of the transport proteins, the diffusion occurs. Okay, and the movement of substances is from greater to lesser concentration, and the chemical energy is not required because this is another say process that comes under the category of passive transport. If we take the examples of facilitated diffusion, it includes the glucose and amino acid transport, the gas transport, and ion transport. Facilitated diffusion is important because it regulates what goes in and what goes out of the cell. And what happens due to this, the plasma membrane, which is the cellular structure, and it is responsible for the selective movements of substances. So plasma membrane here is acting like a selectively permeable membrane that will allow the movement of only selective molecules across the membrane, but they require transport proteins to move across the membrane. Here you can see the diagram. This is showing a lipid bilayer which consists of a phospholipid bilayers. These are some insoluble molecules, and outside environment of the plasma membrane is called extracellular fluid, and this is the intracellular fluid. Okay, and here is an integral membrane protein. So these proteins are very important, and the molecule will get attached with it, and then they will allow the movement of molecule from the area of higher concentration towards there. So they can only permeate, or they can only move or selectively pass through the membrane when with the help of this carrier or transport proteins. Here is active transport, which includes two processes, which includes the chemiosmosis and charge gradient. And in this type of transport, the movement of ions or molecules across the cell membrane into a region of higher concentration. And what happens here, we need an enzyme. So this movement assisted by enzymes, and they also require energy. So the active type of transport requires energy. So here comes the chemiosmosis process. So this is basically the process or a method which cells use to create ATP for energy. ATP is basically adenosine triphosphate, which is a full packet of energy. So electrons start moving across through the electron transport chains to oxygen, where they generate energy, and this energy pumps the hydrogen ions against their concentration gradient from the matrix to intermembrane space so that they can flow back down again. So this is basically a movement of ions across the semi-permeable membrane down their concentration gradient, down their electrochemical gradient. Now let me explain you what does it means down their concentration gradient. As I have told you earlier, we have discussed earlier that a concentration gradient occurs when the concentration of particles is higher in one area than another. Understand? In passive transport, the particles will diffuse down a concentration gradient from areas of higher concentration to areas of lower concentration until they are evenly spaced. So these examples includes the formation of the ATP by the movement of hydrogen ions across the membrane during cellular respiration or photosynthesis. So we have already discussed cellular respiration or photosynthesis. So here you can see a lipid bilayer. These are the proton pumps, and it is the ATP energy that is formed from the oxidation reduction reaction. And here you can see there are a lot of proton and that are moving through the proton pumps. Okay, so this animation is very helpful just to make you sure that you understand the process of chemiosmosis. So if we talk about the charge gradient, which is also called electrochemical gradient, it's basically a gradient of electrochemical potential. Okay, so usually this is for the ion purpose, as the name indicates. This is charge gradient, so it means we are using the ions. So ions that can move across the membrane, and they are using the attractive repulsive properties of ions to move across the membrane. And it basically consists of two parts. The first one is the chemical gradient and the other one is electrical gradient. And the difference in the charge across the membrane occurs in the electrical gradient, whereas the difference in the solute concentration involves in the chemical gradients. As the name also indicates, that the chemical gradient is including the solute concentration, and when we talk about the electrical gradient, it means we are talking about something difference in charge across the membranes. So whenever there are unequal concentration of an ion across a permeable membrane, so what happens, the ions will start moving across the membrane from the area of higher concentration to the area of lower concentration by the process of simple diffusion. So we have already discussed the simple process of diffusion, but here the difference is, here the diffusion of ions are taking place. So ions are also carrying some sort of electric charge that forms or that is creating an electrical potential across the membrane. So whenever there is an unequal distribution of charges across the membrane, the difference in electrical potential generates. And what happens due to this difference in electrical potential, a force is there that drives ions diffusion until the charges are now balanced on both of the sides of the membrane. Let's have a look. Look, this is the cell membrane, which is made up of phospholipids. This is the extracellular environment, and this is intracellular environment. Now, if we take the sodium ions, here you can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 sodium ions are here, whereas in the intracellular membrane, there are only 2. So what happens that in order to balance or maintain the equilibrium, the sodium ions will start moving inside the membrane. Okay, so same is the case with other ions like potassium and chloride ions. So this is how the charge gradient is maintained, and they are moving from the higher concentration towards the lower concentration by a process of simple diffusion. This is a link, and this is very interesting. You will go through different cell transport processes, and this is about 3 minutes and 51 seconds, not that much longer. So do click on the link and enjoy the video. Here is your assignment. You need to read page number 30 to 31 of unit 4, and don't forget to highlight the important points. And let's have a look on your written assignment. So this is the first question that you need to write in your notebook, neat and clean. You will write down the name of your chapter, day. Don't forget to mark the date and day, and draw the margin lines nicely, and then start the question number 1. What is simple diffusion? So here is the answer. You will write it neat and clean. And now let's move towards the question number 2. This is question number 2. What do you mean by osmosis? Define simple diffusion. Okay, so these are very simple questions. This is the question number 4. what is the difference between passive transport and active transport? So here is the difference between both of them. The main difference is passive transport doesn't require energy, whereas active transport requires energy. So this is another question. Question number 5. What do you mean by facilitated diffusion? So the main point here is facilitated diffusion or facilitated transport requires a membrane protein that is located in the plasma membrane, and then they will start moving across the membrane wherever there is lesser concentration. So this is the wrap up. So today we have discussed about the transport of plants that occur at different levels, and then we discussed the different cell processes which includes the passive transport and active transport. Passive transport further includes simple diffusion, osmosis, facilitated diffusion, and active transport include the process of chemiosmosis and charge gradient. I hope you understand the lecture. You just need to go through the lecture again and again and try to learn it by heart. Thank you so much. We'll meet you soon on the Zoom class. Allah Hafiz.